My i3 challenge has went on for way longer than 30 days, so it's definitely time for an update. I want to talk about some of what I've learned and why, for now at least, this challenge is going to be on the back burner. And I've also got a lot more comfortable in i3 since my initial video, so let's start with some of the things that I really like about it. The biggest thing is the keyboard shortcuts. Being able to have so many things just with a few keystrokes is amazing. And the trick with that, though, is you have to be able to shift your mindset to get this to work. So it's definitely one of those things where it can take some time to really get used to this. Additionally, it can also take some time just to refine the key combos to be stuff that makes sense for you. I know in particular I'm using the Arco Linux build. I'll talk more about the Arco Linux build a little bit later in the video, but one thing that I will need to do as I move forward is just go back and pair out some of the extra key combos that I don't need or that I want to use for something different. Luckily enough, my second thing that I really liked was tiling. And this is really good because, it is a tiling window manager, so that's awesome. I didn't really know how I was going to feel about this. I wasn't sure that I was actually going to like the idea of having things just tile and really using maybe one or two apps on a workspace. But now that I've done it for a while, I gotta say, I think that's the way I prefer to work, because I do notice now that on my Mac at work and my KDE Plasma desktop, it just gets a bit more cumbersome to try to find things compared to how I can do so in i3. And so I do think a tiling window manager of some kind will be in my future. But this can come with a downside. The i3 configuration I have currently has 10 workspaces. So if you have a couple of things full screen, that can burn up your workspaces quickly. So ultimately, I think it's something where I'm going to need more toward 15 or 20 workspaces just to have certain things open full screen. The other thing that I'm really thinking about is making more use of something like the scratch pads, where I can have, for example, Emacs or something like that in a scratch pad and not have to worry about it necessarily taking up one of my base workstations. And Discord is another, I think, candidate for that. So I'm just trying to kind of think through and work through what ultimately the best options to actually put in that. But that is something that I think will be helpful as I get further into the tiling window manager stuff, is just being able to better pick out stuff that should go in a scratch pad, for example. I'd of course also mention that I think beyond 2 or 3 applications, tiled is really probably not the way to go. I actually ended up liking the other modes as well. I'll take a screenshot to kind of show how I have OBS, Audacity, and a org document open on one workspace, and I just have them tabbed. And that works pretty well to me, because I can kind of have a full screen workspace for it, but I can also quickly swap between the 3 items. And it's really easy to swap between these just using the super and the left and the right keys that you have assigned. I also occasionally found stack useful, but I think tabbed is probably the way to go if I'm not going to go normal tiling or bring something up full screen. I also wanted to kind of touch on a few challenges that I've kind of conquered, and that first one will just be screenshots. I was trying to use something like Spectacle because it was already installed, but ultimately it just didn't cooperate very well with the way that i3 kind of runs things, and I ended up installing Flameshot. I have it run the Flameshot GUI. So if I take a look at my screen now and I press the print screen button, it'll pop up with this. I can highlight whatever I need to. I can quickly add any edits that I need to, and then I can go and I can actually, save this, copy this, etc., etc. Or if I don't need to, I can just press escape and I am out of that. And I also think just having OBS, Audacity, and my notes for a video kind of come up all together, I think that's a really cool thing that I was able to kind of get that to all cooperate. I really like how I have one of them kind of coming up in a specific workspace. I think in the future, one thing I want to do is be able to essentially launch into OBS, Audacity, or whatever other audio program I use, and my org mode notes all at the same time, so that all I really need to do is pick the org file potentially that I want to work with. I haven't looked too far into launching multiple applications at once, but that's something that maybe in the future I will look at. And another problem that I ended up being able to solve is just making sure that certain apps floated. For example, Godot. I was able to get Godot to kind of work as I needed it, but one thing that I really needed it to do was to open any kind of game that it launched when I was trying to test something. I needed it to open it in a floating window, and that was actually fairly easy to do. And so you can see here I have for window instance and Godot engine, I have floating enable, and Godot editor, I have floating disable. So this makes it so that my editor actually just comes up as a normal tiling window, and it will take up the full screen as long as there's nothing else on that particular workspace. And it also makes it so that any kind of demo that I launch, so if I'm testing something, then it will launch in a floating window, which is definitely what I need for a game like that. All that being said, that has introduced a bit of a problem. So if I bring up the demo for this game, this is just a demo project that's out there that I've downloaded just to check out at one point. But if I open up the game, I have to bring it over to this screen, but if I do Control-Shift-5, and then we'll just make it full screen so we can easily see it. So left and right are the A and the D key. If I press D, nothing happens. I can't seem to move. Occasionally, like I just turned left after pressing the key multiple times. I can eventually turn right if I press the key multiple times. You would think that maybe this is some sort of issue with the game itself, but I can fire just fine. So I'm not exactly sure what the issue is here. I've tried doing some digging and I really haven't found anything. But this is one reason I didn't actually use i3 the first week, because ultimately I was really kind of in the middle of the Linux Game Challenge and I could not figure out why this would not work. I think at first when I first started trying to mess with this, the game was running in frames per minute rather than frames per second. It was really rough. I think I ended up getting something, some dependency installed at that point. But yeah, I just haven't figured out, like, it's almost like it's not staying focused on this somehow, but I don't know. This does not happen in Plasma. I don't know exactly what's going on here, but it's something to do with probably my setup, and it's something that I have to figure out. But that has been something where it just makes it a bit more difficult to deal with things like that, where, it may be an uncommon thing that I'm trying to do. And another thing similarly is Steam. And we're going to roll this right into the next one, but Steam has been a little hit or miss. Sometimes it's kind of weird with the way everything works out, especially with the new UI. That's kind of adding a layer of complexity to it as well. So between the new UI for Steam, which is kind of all over the place when it comes to how it scales, and then of course, the way games launch from Steam sometimes, it's a little tricky to get that to all cooperate in the way I need it. Eventually, I will get this figured out, but it is another thing that I need to solve. But another issue for me is scaling. I've kind of got it working, but since it's X, I can't exactly scale two screens independently very easily. I think what I might try at some point here is to basically run my 4K screen at 1440p. That way they're both 1440, because I have a 21.9 1440p monitor over here that I am using. And so I wonder if running both of them at that 1440p base resolution will actually help here. But it's a little bit rough when it comes to scaling, and the best I can find, you have to set the DPI overall, and it just seems a bit clumsy in comparison to something like Plasma or GNOME or whatever. And the other thing that I would wonder too is if this would be a better experience on something like Sway or Hyperland, where I could independently scale each screen. That would probably help, but I do think what I may try at this point is just to go to 1440p, so on both monitors, and just try to scale from there. That might be the way I have to go. And kind of the last thing, and this is just something that I think with time I would eventually get figured out, but sometimes pop-up windows pop up and they don't gain focus or they're behind something else, especially if I have something in full screen mode. It doesn't seem to decide to lay on top of whatever's in full screen. It's kind of odd in that sense. I kind of get it, but it also is still kind of weird compared to the paradigm that, I'm just so used to at this point. So it's just something where it's an adjustment. And I think with time that I could get a lot of that figured out. I also wanted to kind of give a few tips for people that are looking to try a tiling window manager. If you're looking to jump into something like i3 or Qtile or, one of the other apps like that, I would consider trying to start with a distro that has a build of that particular window manager already, just so that you can take a look at the configuration file and see what's out there. If you're more experienced in programming, especially the programming language that the window manager uses, then you might be able to just get by downloading a configuration file and just looking through it. One thing that I found really helpful to me when I was getting started with i3 was the availability of that configuration file from Arco Linux. There's a lot there that I am probably going to end up deleting, but it also gave me a really good idea of the things that were possible, how to do certain things. And ultimately, that was really helpful and for me to just be able to see, oh, so this is how you might go about doing X. And the other thing that I would say is to focus on kind of building it over time. Realize that you're probably not going to sit down one afternoon and power through this, because especially if you're just installing a new distro, you may be installing new stuff for a little while and, I tend to install tools more as I need them than necessarily having this giant list of things that I need to do. So if you're more like that, you may be configuring for a while. The frustration there can be that it always feels like you're, kind of messing with your system for the first month or whatever because of that. So there's kind of a catch-22 on that, because if you try to do it all, you may have a rougher time just kind of coming to grips with everything, but also you may miss things, or you may not really, even think about something at that point. So to me, I felt like the better way was just to try to kind of configure as I went and kind of update as I went. One other thing that I would say that I really like about this is I really like just how much control you do have, but that does come at the cost of needing to configure every single tiny little thing. And some people will absolutely not like that. Personally, I think the trade-off there is worth it. I'm not a big fan of the micromanagement aspects, but I am a fan of how I can take something and tell it, hey, I always want this to open on workspace 10, or hey, I always want this to open on full screen, and how I can just kind of make that happen. I noticed in Plasma sometimes that a window will open in a way that I don't expect it to, and so it ends up having like the title bar off the top of the screen where you can't actually get to it to move it, or I have to kind of go over to the other screen and kind of grab it. I just see that happen sometimes in Plasma, and it doesn't seem to really matter what I do after that. Some applications seem to do that, and I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe I need to make them all the same size and then close out of the application altogether. Maybe that would help. But I just really like that I know, hey, this is either going to be a floating window or it's going to try to tile. And then it's going to go into, whatever tile configuration that we're at that point. Oh, the other thing that I would say about Arco Linux's setup is that it already has auto tiling, and that is a really helpful thing. In my opinion, i3 without auto tiling is probably not something that I would want to use. What have your thoughts been on tiling window managers? Do you have any more tips for me that you think may be helpful for me as I kind of use this in the background some and try to see if I can learn a bit more about it? Or would you recommend I go a different direction? The other ones that I've really considered are something like Qtile or potentially something like Awesome. I would like to really try something like Hyperland, but the NVIDIA factor plus Wayland is something that can be very hit or miss depending on the machine, and I would really need to test Wayland a bit more on this particular machine before I could do that. And so I might look at that as well, but so far it seems really specific to each machine, whether it's going to cooperate or not. I have one machine that seems to work just fine for the most part on NVIDIA and Wayland, but I've had other machines where it doesn't really work very well at all. And so, yeah, I'm curious to see how that evolves and how something like Hyperland might become more useful on NVIDIA stuff, but that is something that I am contemplating trying out at some point. One other video that I'm working on that may be posted by the time you're watching this is a review of the Arco Linux distribution that I'm using. If you want to check that out, it should be listed right over here somewhere. And as always, thanks for watching, have a great day, and I will see you next time.